Welcome to Collab Conversations, the podcast where impactful discussions serve as catalysts for change. I'm your host, Sabrina Hanna, and this podcast is dedicated to advocacy and the individuals driving positive transformations in the Canadian healthcare landscape. And this episode's guest is Michelle Wana. Michelle, normally I give a small bio about the person I'm talking to, but I find people's backstories interesting. So instead of introducing you, can you tell us briefly how you came to be the Director of Development and Community Relations at Myeloma Canada?
Sure. So I started at Myeloma Canada back in 2016, and my background is not from this industry or this world at all. I was working in professional skincare, for 15 years prior to joining Myeloma Canada. And my dad was diagnosed with multiple myeloma in 2007, and he lived with the disease for over 8 years and sadly passed away in 2015. And at that time, I was doing some volunteering for the organization and some fundraisers, and I'd put on a gala and such. And just a month after his passing, kind of serendipitously, I saw a position come by in the organization that I thought was quite interesting. It was in events and in fundraising, which I thought was quite similar to my background in sales and marketing. And I just sort of on a dime made a career switch, and I've been here ever since and have developed my career in the organization over the last 8 years now.
Wow, that's like I said, everybody's backstory of how they came to be in the patient advocacy space is so interesting. I'm sorry about your loss of your dad, but like the fact that you left the career that you were working in and you came, like you felt like you wanted to make this impact. That's so interesting. And one of the things that you've been doing with Myeloma Canada is the Healthy Matters conference, which I got to attend for the very first time this past October, but I think that you had put on two before the one that I had attended. Can you tell me a little bit about what Healthy Matters is and how it came about?
Sure. So it's a bit of an interesting story. So Myeloma Canada, we work a lot with we have an advocacy pillar, and we work with a lot with patient support groups and advocates that work within our community. And I had the opportunity, I think it was back in like 2018 or so, to attend a conference in the US that invited not just cancer advocates, but patient advocates from an array of different chronic illnesses together for a weekend. It's put on by a pharmaceutical company. So I had attended with my sort of my Myeloma Canada hat on. And I was completely blown away by who was in the room. All of these folks that were in the room had little to no tie with a patient organization. These were individual folks who have basically turned their illness into their life's passion and created using various different platforms, whether that be social media or blogging, vlogging, public speaking engagements, writing opportunities, whatever it was, and created these brands around themselves and these followings. And like enormous followings too. We had some folks, that just on their own personal Facebook public page has, 50, 60,000 followers on it. Going, that's even more than what Myeloma Canada has, right? So it got me thinking, like, there is a whole group of people that have these enormous voices and have huge followings, but we're not paying a lot of attention to them. And how can we bring these people together in Canada to learn from each other, to network from each other, to get opportunities to collaborate with each other? And that sort of sparked the idea to mimic a little bit what was happening with this conference in the US and bring that forward in Canada for our cancer community.
And so this year coming up, it'll be the fourth iteration. How have you seen it evolve since it started?
It's been a really exciting evolution, actually. So we're really excited to be getting into our fourth one now. People are coming to expect the conference, coming to see familiar faces. When we first did the conference, it was kind of like me, the Lone Ranger, going, okay, I got to build a committee. Where am I going to find these people? And there was a lot of, okay, I'm going to go start stalking people on Instagram and X and see if they'd be willing to join and kind of sell them the idea of like, hey, do you want to be part of this conference? And so I got, a committee together, and we sort of navigated the first time of what we wanted it to look like. And our first meeting and the first day, we had a panel discussion with our committee members. And when somebody in the audience put their hand up and they were like, excuse me, what are we doing here? So we've come a long way since. The conference, what we're trying to do here is that it's not really about what your message is. It's not about the topic of advocacy, but it's more the different methods you use to communicate. So that's what brings people together in this conference is that, I could be a breast cancer advocate and somebody else in the room could be a colon cancer advocate, and we're both using the same platform to communicate. And so what can we learn from each other on best practices? What are some areas of commonality where we can join forces? Where can we use the network to spread our message? And that's really what it has created. So the collaborations that we've seen over the last, now going into our fourth year has skyrocketed. And the amount of people who have connected in person, then now connecting in a virtual space and creating those collaborations everywhere has been phenomenal.
Yeah, and how would you say that that has affected their own personal experiences with cancer? I don't know if you know that answer, but
Uh, I think it's kind of just sort of broadened what the word advocacy actually means. I think traditional approach to advocacy, generally people think of like public health policy or drug access and that kind of things, but it really means so much more. It really means bringing awareness to an issue that matters to you. So, what we've been seeing is people, yes, a lot of people in the room have a concern or are focused or are passionate about health policy and such. But, we've got people in the room who are really passionate about EDI, or we have some people who are passionate about young adults living with cancer and the different challenges they face versus an older population. And finding those commonalities is where they've seen their cancer journeys grow. I'll give you a good example is we've had a couple folks who have kind of joined forces on what does advocacy look like in the workplace for people living with cancer. And so completely different cancers, completely different communication methods, but we have that same commonality and have been able to come together on that.
yeah, what does cancer look like in the workplace?
It's not a, it's yeah. It could be difficult to navigate, that's for sure. And experience, I mean, I guess that depends on the professional environment and on what their experience is with it, but it could be very accommodating or not very accommodating.
I think they talked about that actually at the last Healthy Matters conference, the one that I was at, and that actually was a really interesting discussion with the two people who were talking about it. I think it was two people who were talking about it.
So
But
what's good about, sorry, I just want to add to that is actually those two people that were speaking about it had met for the first time at the previous year of Healthy Matters, and then over the years said, hey, can we, like, we got something we want to talk about. Is this something we can present? So that's what we've been seeing too, is at the end of the conference sparking ideas of people like, oh, I think we should really talk about that at the next conference. Oh, I'd really like to bring this to this conference. So it's been about sharing expertise. It's been about sharing my know-how with you and you with me. Most of the speakers that attend or that are part of the conference are they're patient advocates themselves, and it's really about being able to share what we're good at with each other.
so just keeping on the theme of like advocacy in the workplace, have they been able, like they're meeting at Healthy Matters and then they're having these collaborations? Are they able to take that outside of the Healthy Matters room and into their actual workplaces where they can make a difference?
Yeah, and I think, and that's a lot of the discussions that have been happening, sort of sidebar conversation outside of this, outside of the presentation. Is like, hey, I heard what you said, and this is what I've done, or this is the things, or this is the program that I've integrated at my work, and so it kind of sparks that kind of momentum of, okay, here's what I think I need to bring back to my work, and here's what I think I need to, or how I need to speak about it with my employer, etc.
Well, yeah, that's really interesting. But you also said how, they're sharing their know-how with you and you're sharing your know-how with them. So how do you feel like their know-how, how has that impacted the work that you do at Myeloma Canada?
Yeah, so people ask all the time, and they'll say like why, if you're Myeloma Canada, like why are we focusing on all the cancers? Like what is it, what does that have to do with your organization? And the answer to that is actually a lot. So what we have to think about more is stop working so much in silos. because there's a lot more commonality in just cancer than there is just in specific things. So we have advocates from our community that join this event, as there is from every other community. And like I was just saying, there's a lot of things that are common that it doesn't have to be specifically from the myeloma world to make a difference. Public policy, health policy is a good example of that. Of, if somebody from the breast cancer world makes a positive change in the healthcare environment, well, that's only going to benefit somebody from the myeloma community and vice versa. So how can we leverage all of these different things and all of these different platforms to kind of create that change?
Yeah. So you talked about how, this conference in the US with people who are using their experience to make it their life's passion, and they've got 50 and 60,000 followers, which is, more than what Myeloma Canada had at that moment. And so, like, social media has really changed the playing field. And it's not just, you don't have to be somebody to get your message out. And I think about a campaign that we did where, we were using the stereotypical bald woman to talk about cancer. And I think like somebody like Nally Augustin, who, unfortunately passed away from breast cancer, but she was really young and she wasn't like the typical white woman that you normally see in the ads, talking about, or the awareness ads, talking about breast cancer. So I feel like, maybe she was like in the Canadian context anyway, she was really at the forefront of people coming out and telling their story and sharing it on social media. Like, how do you feel that I guess Healthy Matters, but also the people who are sharing their stories, how has that brought a different lens to that cancer experience, to talking about cancer too?
So funny, as you were saying the word lens, that was the word that was in my head. So it really has. So it's kind of changed the way we do things. So we think of traditional advocacy of like letter writing campaigns, or like position papers, or knocking on Parliament's door. And you never know. Well, you never know the collaborations and the people who are listening and following you on all of these different platforms. There's an audience for everything. There's an audience on every different space that exists. And you never know that is 6 degrees of separation, like who you're going to touch by posting these things. Some of the really interesting stuff about this kind of space too is that it doesn't necessarily have to be a page specific to your advocacy. So in the case of like Nali or Lolita, for example, she was a speaker at our conference a couple years ago. You can use your whatever it is you're good at, whatever following you have on whatever platform you have, and you've already got people listening and watching, you've got an audience. So you can use that. So, Lolita she's a fashion blogger. That's her life, her background, her career. And as a patient advocate, using that medium when you've got tens of thousands of followers to be able to share your voice. If I'm on X, and I'm posting a message and I've got a friend who follows me who is also an advocate from a different space, may have a connection elsewhere as well. So by sharing, retweeting things that can get out of our normal sphere of reaching people. And exactly to your point is that you don't have to be the one person who's known that everybody goes to. And, we have these traditional advocates of like the go-to faces that, people see in Canada, but having all of these, TikTok is a whole different universe now. And it opens up so many different opportunities.
Yeah, I'm too scared to get onto TikTok. I'm not that tech savvy, so already having a podcast is enough for me. But
Well, so that's funny you say that, because we had a talk. I think it was in the last conference. It was 2 conferences ago, specifically on TikTok. We had somebody in the room who their platform was on Twitter/X. Huge following there. That's where they did all their advocacy. I've got my own branding, I've got my own avatar, I've got my own logo, I've got the whole thing on there. Sat in on the TikTok thing, and he puts his hand up to the person who was presenting and said, "Okay, listen, I'm a millennial, but TikTok scares me, and I'm not really sure where to start." And by the end of the presentation, got him to kind of open his horizon and say, "Hey, look, and hey guys, I've just opened up a new avenue now. Like, having learned this, I'm giving it a try. I'm putting my toe in here. So now we're taking the one platform that we're already used to and kind of putting it across several."
yeah, I think if it's recorded, I'd have to go back and listen to it because I'm not ready to go there. But one of the things that you're also doing this year is like you're branching out and you've created these impact series too that fall under Healthy Matters, if I'm not mistaken. So do you want to talk to us a little bit about the impact series?
Yeah, so we're calling it a series, even though there's only one just now, just for future, just for the future planning if there are other topics that we'd like to cover. And this we're looking at it kind of as a more topic specific, a sub-series kind of conference that will feed into the larger conference in the fall. So the one that we're particularly looking at now is bringing EDI to clinical trials. And why this is going to be interesting is because it's patient advocate led, and the discussion revolves around patient advocates. But in the fashion of Healthy Matters, it's drug agnostic, it's cancer agnostic, it's disease agnostic, geography agnostic, and we're bringing everybody to this meeting that would have an implication in a clinical trial. So whether that be a researcher, industry, nurses, diversity officers, CROs, etc. And if we can bring them all in a space where we're not particularly talking about a product, a disease, or something specific, we can just as a group work from the lens of a patient advocate on how we can work on systemic change.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because now I'm thinking about the people who were in the room at the conference in October, and it was a majority of women. And so, I mean, we're talking about EDI, and I think, as you know, that it's really important that we bring that female lens into the conversation because it's not something that we do really well. But when we think about advocates, the majority are women.
Yeah, and I think we see that also just even from a support community as well, like those who run support groups or volunteers in various events. We tend to see, I think I could say that probably, I'm not saying that with 100% certainty, but in our community, certainly that's the way it is. And yeah, we definitely want to encourage as much diversity as possible. I was actually having a conversation with somebody the other day of how we look at, because Healthy Matters is a application, like you have to apply to get into the meeting, that we want to be sure that we have a good sprinkling of everything on there so that it's not skewed one way to the other. So we're not just looking at male, female, but we're looking at ethnicities, we're looking at age, we're looking at disease type, we're looking at geography, we're looking at platform type. So you don't want to get 90 people in the room, that 85 of them are on X and 5 people are on Meta, right? We want to get a good representation. So all of those things come into play to make sure we have a real mixed bag of content.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting too. And I think from last year's conference, going back to that again, you had people who had also just immigrated to Canada, which brings a different lens as well.
Yeah, and so what we've been seeing is I mean, obviously the first year it was just like get as many advocates as we can find. Just we had to get the word out, right? And then as the second year and the third year rolled around, we have advocates in the room say, you know what, I'm connected with so and so. Probably like what's happened with you to come to the conference is you've connected with so and so and say, oh, you got to hear about this conference. You've got to. And so the spider web has been going out. So we've been able to get some really neat connections over the last couple of years.
Yeah. And actually it was Martine who told me that I
Oh,
should go. So you were talking at the very start, you said cancer advocates versus patient advocates. And so how do you make that distinction?
okay, because advocates don't necessarily have to be patients, right? So you can be advocating, like for me, I'm not a patient, but I advocate for my community, I advocate for cancer. So looking at it from a bit of a broader spectrum, generally speaking, most of the people in the room have lived experience themselves personally with cancer or are caring for somebody, but it doesn't have to be. It
Yeah.
really doesn't. So if you're talking about cancer in any way, then you're a cancer advocate.
Yeah. That's a interesting way to look at it. For me, like obviously I'm an advocate and I'm a patient advocate, but I'm not actually a cancer patient, but I've never just not considered myself to be a patient advocate or a cancer advocate, just an advocate. So that's a really interesting perspective to bring to the table. I think in Europe they talk a lot about patients with lived experience, or patient experts actually is what they call them, versus advocates that we would use here.
Yeah, I kind of like that terminology too. Is again, we have this like notion in our head what advocate means, and we always tend to pinpoint that onto health policy specifically when that's just a piece. That's just a piece of the whole story, right?
Yeah.
I like the idea of
So
patient expert for sure.
yeah. Actually, when I brought it up at a conference and people came to see me afterwards and they're like, yeah, like patient experts. Like I didn't make it up. They've been using it in Europe for a really long time. I've written a couple of op-eds on healthing, and the last one I just wrote and I was really proud about was, the sex disaggregated data in healthcare and why it's important. And essentially, sex disaggregated data just means not thinking about women as small men, but really looking at them as, like our immune systems work differently, our pain receptors are different, our brains work differently, and we have to stop looking at drug development for men and women the same. And Healthing published it, and there was a comment that was written um, under, they have the comment section,
Yeah.
and Douglas, I won't say his last name, but Douglas commented, so glad you exposed this for the 1,000th time. Strong work. So, for people who are putting their cancer experience out there and they're making themselves vulnerable, like how do you put that wall up to protect yourself from people like Douglas and like a million other people that I won't even talk about, but there's so much of that out there.
Those conversations we have a lot at these meetings too, is that you got to have a thick skin, because you're putting a very vulnerable piece of yourself out there, and you don't know what you're going to get back, right? And especially if it's an opinion piece, you're gonna get all kinds back, and that coupled with um, sharing your story. I always refer to advocates as like a flight attendant, and you have a lot of lived experience, and a lot of folks who are following you are they're the passengers looking at you for guidance. And she's doing okay, so I should be okay. And then you, by association, become their caregiver or their support person. And you can imagine once you start getting into thousands and thousands and thousands of followers, well, that could become overwhelming. And you gotta have to have that wall that's there, because you have to be able to, protect yourself and protect. So yeah, I don't think it's for the I think there's probably a lot of learning curves over time of how to handle that yourself. And I think probably at the beginning when you're getting out, it would be having to recognize when it's happening. And it'll probably, it's like the first cut's the deepest kind of thing, and then you start to get that thick skin. But know that it is a part of the process, and it's not something you can get away from if you want to be in this space.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not being vulnerable. I'm just giving scientifically backed information. But I see comments like that and I'm like, really? Did you even read the article? So I can't imagine having that experience and like allowing yourself to be vulnerable like that and to get those negative comments. I think about Lisa Machado. I don't know if you follow her on Instagram, but she posted something and some dude, it's usually a dude, made a comment. And like she actually did a TikTok and she was like, if you ever get cancer, and I don't remember what the comment was, but she's like, if you ever get cancer, call me and I will hold your hand. And I was like, like she obviously is experienced, but there's a lot of people out there who like I can't even imagine. I
Yeah, and
would not.
that's the handling it well, in the sense of, I'm just going to shower you with happiness, and haters going to hate. The internet's a wild place, and it could be a very cruel place. And you got the keyboard warriors is like, you'll never get to, but then of course they'll never say it to your face, but it's always going to be behind a keyboard, right? So you just have to keep that in mind of just this is a free space. We're all free to say what we want to say. At the end of the day, we're sort of the majority of the people that are following you are following you because you have a positive thing to say. And so those are the ones we need to keep focusing on, because those are the ones who are going to help make change, right? It's not those
Yeah.
haters.
Yeah.
The haters
I
can take a
just
seat.
yeah, because I just feel like I wouldn't want people to not share their story because it's so important. And even like for yourself to share your story to make you feel better, but it helps us in the work that we do too. And when we go talk to the government and the people who are making the decisions, like we go with our research and our data and our information, but when you bring that personal perspective, it really makes a difference too. So if you're listening and you've gotten the hate mail, don't stop, just keep going.
Don't stop, but it also helps you sharpen your message. Look at it as, someone's giving, it's not great feedback, but they're giving you feedback and they're giving you, comments. So look at it in a sense of, okay, well, why are they saying that? And how's this going to help me strengthen my message? Because, I'm always, people say things about Healthy Matters, like, how does it just roll off the tongue? I was like, well, say it enough times and it just comes out naturally, right? So it's kind of one of those things that just keep repeating. And then as you're saying it, there's words that'll come, they'll stick to you. And then you end up your sales pitch and your message become a lot stronger over time, the more you say it.
Yeah, it's so important. And on the same topic, I think you asked me to present on starting a podcast for this new Healthy Matters coming up in October. And, I'm super excited and super nervous about it, but I've been thinking about it and I was like, why did I start a podcast? And really the story is that um, there have been so many stories in the press about how patient advocates and patient advocacy groups specifically have been in the pocket of pharma. And, like there is no platform for the patient advocates to say, hey, like actually, no, this is not true. This is the work that we are doing. And so for me, I felt it was so important to create this platform where we can talk about the stuff that patient advocates do because it's blood, sweat, and tears. And it's not like, okay, pharma, whatever you want us to do, just give us the money, because it's really not like that. And we don't have a platform where we can talk about this amazing work that everybody is doing. So
I can't agree with you more. I think it's such a sad old story that just gets clicks and follows and likes on a lot of misinformation on that. And that's part of what we're trying to do at Healthy Matters, is kind of break those stigmas. And as you know, we have all of our pharma partners come and take part in a meeting as participants in the room, and being able to talk and converse and learn what's important to our advocate community, but also an opportunity for advocates to learn where there are opportunities for advocacy within the drug development spectrum, and where there can be collaborations or not. And there are a lot of guardrails, especially in Canada, that are in place for a reason, to stop any of that overlap or overstepping or being bought out by. There are rules against that. So it's up to advocates who have these voices and these followings to set the record straight as well, right?
yeah, and it's so important. I mean, even the work that the patient advocates do, um, organized in a group or not, is just so important because we're basically expected to fix healthcare systems, and it's impossible for us to do it without funding, wherever that funding comes from.
And it's not just on advocates, it's not just on advocacy groups, it's not just on industry, it's not just on lobbyists, it's not just it takes a group effort. And everybody has different reasons for wanting to create change, but at the end of the day, it's the same change we want to create, and everybody wants to move forward in a positive way, regardless of what the motivation is.
Yeah. And so where do you see Healthy Matters going, like from this year to next year? Where would you
I
like to see it?
we just had a committee meeting a couple weeks ago about some of the things that we want to include this year. And I want this platform to be a living, breathing, ever evolving kind of space, because advocacy changes all the time, and the way we advocate. So for example, one of the things that we're talking about including is advocacy in AI. So that will definitely become a hot topic as AI is kind of exploding. And so what should patient advocates look out for? What are the opportunities to utilize AI to learn from, to build upon? That would be interesting for our community. So those are the types, like just kind of keeping an eye on what's the trend is. The last thing we want is for something to stay stagnant. We want to be avant-gardist, right? So we want to be ahead of what's coming and being able to mobilize our community.
Yeah. Are there any other points on Healthy Matters that you want to bring up?
Well, maybe just a shameless plug. So the registration, the application period will go up in the month of May.
So for anybody who's interested in participating in Healthy Matters this year, what do they need to do?
So they can sign up to we have a newsletter if you go to healthematters.ca. So the spelling on that is not exactly like a regular spelling. So it's the letter E, matters.ca. So all one word.ca. And then there's a sign up for the newsletter button on there. We will send out a notice to our community in the month of May for the application period. So people feel like, I'm not sure if I'm an advocate. I'm not sure if I'm doing things right. I'm not sure if I'm, should be involved in this. Is what I can say is if you're using any platform, regardless of what it is, even if you're on several or you're on just one, if you're talking about cancer in any way, then you are a cancer advocate and you should definitely apply to be part of this meeting. Like I said, we do go through a process after of accepting, which will be over the summer. And even if it's not, it's not in the cards for this year, just keep at it and keep applying and follow our community on socials, because it's a really neat space to connect with others who are doing similar things to you are.
Yeah, and I would just add that language is not a barrier. So if English is not your first language, it doesn't matter. You should still apply.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and I'll make sure that the healthymatters.ca is included in the video, so it'll be linked in the description.
Wonderful.
And are there other areas that Myeloma Canada is working on? Like, what are the priority areas for Myeloma Canada?
So Myeloma Canada, advocacy in Myeloma Canada is one of our pillars that we focus on. It's one that's likely, and I think this would probably be across all groups. It's kind of the unsung hero. It's the one we talk about the least, or the one that's least understood. But we want to make sure, and we're very strong and passionate people that work with us at our organization, that we can focus on all the research in the world, but then if we don't have access to that innovation, then all of that doesn't mean anything, right? So myeloma specifically is kind of at an influx point right now with new generations of treatments that are becoming available, so in cellular therapy specifically. And access is going to be a challenge to those things. And for a cancer that is deemed incurable at this point, being able to get access to those quickly and timely is a challenge. So that's something we're heavily focused on and will be focused on in the coming years. We were talking about the biggest breakthroughs was, back in like 2016 when the word immunotherapy was just becoming a thing. And that was a breakthrough then. And where we've evolved to in such a short time is now we're like, okay, we're even more past that now into cellular therapies. And this is going to be the next generation of treatment. So this is where we need to put our eggs in.
Yeah, I think you're talking about CAR T. And I remember the first time I heard about CAR T, and I was at a melanoma conference, and it must have been early 2017 or late 2016 maximum. And they were talking about the process, and I was like, this sounds like science fiction. And I
It
was like,
is.
there's this is what came to my mind. This sounds like science fiction. It's gonna be a long time before we see this coming. And here we are, and I mean, I don't remember what the state of the, like, if it's been approved or reimbursed yet, but
There are a couple different types of cellular therapies, some being bispecifics, some being the CAR T side.
mhm,
They are There's a couple of that have been Health Canada approved. None of them are funded yet. So
okay.
that'll be the challenge, is that, maybe bispecifics are they're administered like a drug. So that might be a little easier, but the CAR Ts, because there's so many pieces of the puzzle, and in manufacturing and shipping out and getting back and having to have specialty centers to be able to do this, it's logistically it's more complicated. So we're hoping we can help facilitate the processes and the approvals for that.
Yeah. And in terms of digital tools and digital advocacy, are there other things that Myeloma Canada is working on specifically? I mean, obviously, other than Healthy Matters, but Myeloma Canada or Healthy Matters is really at the forefront of this, bringing the patient advocates into the work that the cancer advocates are doing.
So some of I think the really interesting things that we're working on are actually not focused. I mean, we have the health policy stuff that we're doing, but one of the areas that we're really starting to get involved with are self-advocacy. And so bringing tools to people to be able to better ask questions, to better be equipped when they meet with their healthcare team. Um, because our disease is very heterogeneous and no one case is the same and no one life is the same, being able to tailor your conversations and tailor your treatment paths and your journey with myeloma has kind of proven to give better outcomes to people living with the disease. So one of the things that we're going to be integrating into our programming is a concierge type of offering. And it'll be funny, we're talking about AI, it'll be sort of utilizing some online AI tools, so that when we have somebody phoning in to us, we can tailor make a resource package based on the things that they're searching for. So it'll use things like uh, Google Maps and some of our resources on our website. I'm asking about, okay, where can I get supportive care? Where can I get access to a physiotherapist? Where can I understand managing side effects? And through all of these things, we can use our AI tools to build this toolkit and say, here you go. So we want to be able to tailor information that's being given out, and pertinent information, so that we can help the person who's looking for those resources to find it all in one spot.
Oh, yeah, that sounds really interesting. So, any final thoughts on Healthy Matters? Call to action to people who are listening?
Yeah, I'd say, if you don't have to wait till the month of May to get started, to get a part of our community. You can follow us on the socials. You feel free to tag us on any interesting things that you're doing. We'd be happy to share as well if you've got any exciting programs or projects underway. And check out who's also following our pages, and follow each other. This is a really great opportunity to meet others from your community. And sometimes I've met a bunch of advocates that say, "Oh, I thought I was the only one doing this." Well, no, there's a lot. There are a lot of advocates out there. Sometimes the challenge is finding them, but this is a kind of a good central meeting spot, let's say.
And so does Healthy Matters have a social handle?
Yeah, they would be health, depending on which platform you're on. It's generally Healthy Matters or health underscore e matters.
Yeah. Okay, I'll include those also in the description. So I think for me, my learning from our conversation today is the way that advocacy is changing, and it's not really just in the hands of the patient groups anymore. There's a lot that people can do to advocate for themselves and to change the way that the way that decisions are being made in healthcare.
Absolutely, and exactly that is that we want to, as organizations, we want to support our advocates as much as we possibly can, because you are doing really great work and you don't have to be going at it alone. And we do want to collaborate, and this is exactly what this space is for, is let us help. You're doing really great stuff, and let us help make you do better stuff.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I think what I would end on this is that you don't have to do it alone.
Don't have to do it alone.
You don't have
There's
to.
lots like you.
Yes. And if you want to know how to get in touch with all the people, then follow Healthy Matters and look at who they're following or who's following them.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's a very wide community, but then when you start connecting with folks, oh, that person's connected with that person, is connected with that person, and the world starts to get a lot smaller.
Yeah. And actually, I said I was going to end on that, but I've got a question. Do you find that, I mean, Canada's such a big country. Do you find that there are people connecting from across the country?
Absolutely. We have people that are joining our conference from coast to coast to coast, basically, in all the provinces and everywhere in between. We've got folks who are in, BC who are closely collaborating with people in Newfoundland, and we've got people coming in from Nova Scotia who are working with people in Ontario. That's the beauty of the internet is you don't have to be anywhere specific, and
Yeah.
even international collaborations as well, right?
Yeah. And so is Healthy Matters available hybrid?
Uh, yeah, yes and no. That just all depends on who needs to be registering as if we have a demand for it. If there isn't a
Okay.
demand, then no, then it'd be in the in person. But if there is demand, then yes, it's there. So coming back to your point about people collaborating kind of across Canada and across the US, actually, we just had this conversation about looking for some speakers for our fall meeting, and somebody on our committee was like, "Oh, I'm connected with this TikToker from LA." And we've met over socials, and then we've connected, and now we email, and we're good friends now. I think she would be a really great person to speak. And so that's the kind of things that's been happening is like you're meeting whoever and wherever, and their space is accessible to everybody.
Yeah. And I've attending your conference, I feel like I've connected with a lot of people too, and people that I would never normally connect with because I don't do a lot of the patient facing stuff. So like I, one of my favorite conferences to go to
Me too.
throughout the year. So just another plug for Healthy Matters. So on that note, I think I will end it now.
Okay.
Thank you, Michelle, for joining me today and having the conversation with me. And to everyone who's listening or watching, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay informed, stay curious.